Spoke with Lana Pollack yesterday, the U.S. chair of the International Joint Commission, about regulation. The IJC came out with recommendations this spring saying that Lake Erie has some serious problems and pointing to nutrient overloading. What were some of those recommendations?
Well, the recommendations were to look where the problems are, identify what the source is, and then act there. The point is, let's take an analogy. You want to treat what's wrong. So if somebody has indigestion, you don't want to be trying to put a cast on their elbow. You got to go where the problem is. And what we determined through the science, and there was a lot of scientific investment in determining this, is the main source of the phosphorus, which is the main driver of the algal blooms, is runoff from farm fields. Now, there are other runoff that has phosphorus. So when it rains and you've got a streetscape in an urban area, you do have some phosphorus. You have some animal waste, and you just have other things that are coming in there, and you also have some underperforming wastewater treatment plants. But by far the biggest source is the phosphorus from the fertilizers from the farming areas. And like I said, if that's what the disease is, then you have to treat that disease.
You have said what happened to Toledo's water supply this summer for 3 days, the fact that it was impacted by those toxic algal blooms, that was the teachable moment. Now, the IJC can't make policy. Do you believe that there is some political will there, after what happened in Toledo, to limit some kind of phosphorus use as opposed to the best practices that agriculture is using now?
I don't know. We haven't seen the evidence yet come out of either Columbus, Ohio, the capital of Ohio. We haven't seen it come out of Lansing, Michigan, and we haven't seen it come out of Washington. Now, I don't want to be too cynical, but I would write off any response from Washington in the short term. For one thing, it's pretty dysfunctional. But for another thing, Washington represents the entire country. Whereas if you get down to Lake Erie, that's Michigan, and that's Ohio. And those elected officials have a responsibility and should be focused there. So far, we've not seen anything come out of any of them that will make a difference.
So when you say it's a teachable moment, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's a teachable moment that I think that this is a problem that can be addressed. The good news is it can be fixed. And a lot of problems we live with that we just have to adapt to. But we don't have to accept these algal blooms. We know the cause. We know what we can do, and we just have to wait to see if it's done.
And people will say, well, we can't wait that long, can we?
Well, there's an old saying is that if you don't change directions, you're likely to get where you're going. We have to change directions. It will take some years, and that's one of the things that the IJC says. We don't have all the science on this, and in other words, we don't know if you took these steps, how long it would take to have a substantive difference. And we call for more monitoring. We call for more research. We call for more gauges. We want to know exactly where this phosphorus is coming from, which fields or other places. And we want to know where it comes and in what conditions it comes. So we're calling for more science, but we're confident that the science that we have shows that if you change your practices, you'll change your results.
So you have the science, and now you're looking for a little bit more action. And interestingly enough, though, Lake Erie, this doesn't just impact Lake Erie. The IJC is a binational organization that you also have some areas in Canada that are looking at these algal blooms as well. So it's not just a Lake Erie problem.
It's definitely not just a Lake Erie problem, and it's not just a Great Lakes problem. Elsewhere in the Great Lakes, we have Green Bay and Saginaw Bay in particular, but I've walked the beaches and seen algal blooms in other places too that I've never seen in my lifetime on the Great Lakes. And I want to tell you, the Canadians rightfully are very proud of Lake Winnipeg. It's not as big as a Great Lake, but it is a big, important lake, and it has substantial algal bloom problems, really substantial problems. And there too, they're on the receiving end of a lot of water that flows through the Red River and that carries a lot of phosphorus.
Last question for you. What do you expect to see happen, and what would you like to see happen in the next 3 or 4 months on the algal bloom issue?
I'd like to see the governments, the state government officials, the two governors and the people in the legislature in Columbus and in Lansing say that they are going to seriously consider and draft legislation that would stop saying, please will you apply best practices, please will you stop polluting the water, please will you stop putting fertilizer on frozen ground that we know is going to run off into the lakes, and say you must do it. Because you have a lot of good farmers. They are doing the right things, but they're still a minority, and you shouldn't have to ask people to protect the lakes. They should be required.
Lana Pollack from the IJC, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.